There was a time, not so long ago, when a small piece of land could feed a family, pay the mortgage, put kids through school, and still have something left to tuck away for winter. The people who did it were not large landowners. They were not wealthy. They were not running businesses, at least not in the way we use that word today. They were just families, with a few small animals. 20 different kinds of animals quietly built the working family farms of the last century, and most of them are completely forgotten now. Some of them got pushed aside by industrial agriculture, which could not figure out how to scale them. Some of them disappeared because the families that knew how to raise them moved to the city, and some of them were quietly written out of the story entirely because the modern food system did not need them. And what the modern food system does not need does not survive in textbooks. Today I want to walk you through 20 of those animals. The ones our grandparents and great-grandparents kept, the ones that paid the bills, fed the family, and made small farms work in a way that almost no farm works today. Stay with me until the end, because animal number 14 is one almost nobody talks about anymore, and it was probably the single most important income source on most family farms before World War II. And number 19, the one I want you to hear right before we finish, is something my own grandmother kept on her property until the day she passed. Almost no one keeps them anymore. They are some of the most useful animals you can have on a small piece of land, and almost no one knows it. Let's get into it. Before we do, if these are the kinds of things you want more of, the old ways, the practical truth about small farms, the knowledge most people are not sharing anymore, take a second to subscribe and turn on the bell. We publish content like this every week, and there's more on the way. Hit subscribe. Stick with us. Let's keep going. Every working family farm had chickens, not as a hobby, not as a pet, as the steadiest source of cash income on the entire property. My great-grandmother kept a flock of about 30 hens. She gathered eggs every morning before breakfast. By the end of the week, she had 10 or 12 dozen eggs that she sold from a hand-painted sign at the end of the driveway, or carried into town in a wicker basket. The money from those eggs paid for sugar, flour, coffee, kerosene, and most of the small bills that came due each month. That was not a side income, that was the income. In hundreds of thousands of family farms across America between 1900 and 1950, what fed the family was the garden, and what paid the bills was the henhouse. Modern small farmers often forget this. They get fancy heritage breeds, they call it a hobby, they sell a dozen eggs at a farmer's market once a week. The old way was simpler and more lucrative. Reliable layers, year-round production, regular customers right at the property line, and a steady stream of small bills that added up to real money over 12 months. Hens still pay the bills. Most modern keepers just stop charging properly for what they produce. Almost every working family farm in America between 1850 and 1950 kept at least one pig, often two, sometimes a sow with her litter. The pig was not a side animal. The pig was a financial cornerstone. Old farmers had a name for a particularly profitable sow. They called her the mortgage lifter. The phrase was not metaphorical. A single sow could produce 10 or 12 piglets a year. Sold at weaning age, that was real money. Kept and raised on the farm, the pigs became hams, sausages, lard, bacon, and salt pork that fed the family for an entire year and produced surplus that could be sold or traded. Pigs were the first domestic animal to follow American settlers across the Appalachians. They were called the noble pig in some old farming texts. Without pigs, the slow westward push of the American frontier would have been almost impossible. The animal that quietly fed and funded the entire expansion was the family hog. Modern small farms often skip the pig because it sounds like more work than it is. The old farmers would have laughed at that. One pig in fall, processed at home with the help of 3 neighbors, fed a family for the winter and paid for the rest. The math has not really changed. The willingness to do the math has. Goats were called the poor man's cow for a reason. They produced milk for far less feed than a dairy cow required. They tolerated rougher pasture. They gave birth to twins more often than not, doubling your herd faster than any cow could. And they were small enough that any member of the family, including the children, could handle them safely. On the homesteads of the early 20th century, the goat was the difference between a family that had milk every day and a family that did not. A single Nubian or Saanen doe gave 1 to 2 gallons of rich milk daily through her lactation. That was butter, cheese, fresh milk for children, and surplus to feed the pigs and chickens. Even today, a small herd of 3 or 4 does can produce enough milk for a family with surplus left to sell as raw milk, where legal, or processed into chèvre and feta cheese for the local market. Goats kid twice a year in many systems. Each kid you do not keep can be sold or processed. Goat meat is one of the most widely eaten meats in the world. America has a small fraction of that market today, but it is growing fast in many regions, and the breeders who got in early are the ones with all the customers. The poor man's cow built a lot of homesteads. It still can. Rabbits are the animal modern small farmers most consistently underestimate. Old farmers did not. A single doe rabbit bred properly produces 25 to 50 offspring per year. Each one reaches market weight in 8 to 12 weeks on a feed-to-gain ratio that beats almost every other meat animal on the planet. Rabbit meat is leaner than chicken, higher in protein per pound than beef, and absolutely cheap to produce in a small space. Wartime governments ran public campaigns encouraging citizens to raise rabbits at home, because 4 does and a buck could supply a family with all the meat they needed for the year. The colonies were called rabbitries. They sat in backyards, sheds, garages, anywhere with a roof and a few square feet of floor space. Modern rabbit raising in America is a niche activity, but the math is unchanged. The same 4 does and a buck still produce the same amount of meat. The only difference is that almost nobody does it anymore, and the chefs who want rabbit on their menus cannot find a steady supply. That gap is the opportunity. Ducks were on almost every old farmstead, but they were not kept for ornament. They were working animals. A flock of laying ducks produced eggs through weathering conditions that stopped chickens cold. Duck eggs are larger, richer, and prized by bakers for the way they perform in pastry. While chickens stop laying through the winter without artificial light, ducks keep going through the cold months when egg prices climb. That seasonal reliability made them a quiet financial advantage. Ducks also worked the property in ways that no other bird could. They controlled slugs, snails, and garden pests. They cleared aquatic weeds from ponds. They turned waste vegetable matter and kitchen scraps into protein-rich eggs. A flock of 15 ducks on a small farm replaced 3 or 4 pieces of work that the farmer would otherwise have had to do himself. Modern small farms have largely defaulted to chickens. The old farmers knew the duck had its own job, and the job paid. Almost every old farm had at least one beehive somewhere on the property. Most had several. The hive paid for itself many times over. Honey for the family table, honey for sale to neighbors, beeswax for candles, polish, and waterproofing, pollen for the medicine cabinet, and the pollination service the bees provided the orchard and garden, which was worth more than the honey ever was, even if no one ever wrote a check for it. Old beekeepers did not run their hives the way modern hobby beekeepers do. They did not buy fancy equipment. They did not chase exotic genetics. They kept simple wooden hives, often in straw skeps in earlier eras, and they harvested honey once or twice a year, and let the bees do their own work in between. A single managed hive produces 40 to 60 pounds of honey in a normal year. At current direct-to-consumer prices, that is $400 to $700 in honey alone, plus beeswax, plus the parallel income from pollen and propolis if you process them. Beekeeping is one of the few old farm income streams that has actually become more valuable over time, not less. The supply still cannot keep up with the demand. If the henhouse paid the small bills, the family cow kept the household running. A single dairy cow kept in milk produced 4 to 6 gallons of milk every day. That was butter on the table, cream for cooking, fresh milk for the children, cheese for the pantry, buttermilk for baking, and surplus to feed pigs, chickens, and dogs. One cow, properly fed, replaced an entire grocery bill. A Jersey cow on the right pasture, milked twice a day, produces milk with butterfat content nearly twice that of a commercial Holstein. A brown Swiss handles cold winters that would put down most modern dairy breeds. A Guernsey gives milk so rich that 2 gallons of it produces nearly a pound of butter. Modern families do not keep a cow because a gallon of milk at the grocery store seems cheap. The old farmers knew the cow was not really about the milk. It was about the entire economic structure of the household, where one large producer eliminated dozens of monthly purchases. That math, if you do it honestly, still favors the cow on any small farm with the pasture to support her. Sheep were the multi-purpose animal of the old small farm. Wool, milk, meat, lawn mowing services on rough pasture. A single ewe gave you all 4, year after year, on land that often could not support cattle. In the eastern United States, almost every working family farm had a small flock of 3 to 10 ewes. The wool was sheared each spring and either spun at home or sold to local mills. The lambs born each spring became either replacement stock or were sold for meat in fall. The milk, when it was used, became some of the most valuable cheese on the farm. Modern small farms have largely abandoned sheep, partly because wool no longer commands the prices it once did. But the meat and dairy markets for sheep have grown faster than any other livestock category in the United States over the last decade. American lamb is in chronic short supply. Sheep cheese commands premium prices. The farmers who got back into sheep early are clearing real income on small acreage. Almost every old farm pond had geese. They were not kept for novelty. They were the watchdogs, the lawn maintenance, and the holiday meat, all in one animal. Geese pay attention. They notice when something approaches the property that should not be there, and they make noise about it. Old farmers used a flock of geese the way modern people use a security system. Except the geese also produced meat, eggs, down feathers, and the highest quality natural fertilizer in any flock of birds. The Christmas goose was a tradition for a reason. A well-finished goose is one of the richest, most flavorful birds you can put on a holiday table, and most American families today have never tasted one. That makes the goose, in 2026, a premium specialty product. Restaurants serving traditional French and German cuisine pay genuine premium prices for fresh local geese, and almost nobody is producing them. This one is going to surprise some of you. For nearly 2,000 years, kept pigeons were one of the most common food animals on small farms in Europe and America. The pigeons housed in the loft, called squab when young, produced enormous amounts of meat for very little input. A single pair of breeding pigeons produces 12 to 16 squabs per year. The squabs reach market weight in just 4 weeks. They eat almost nothing the parents do not bring back themselves. They require minimal labor, and the meat is some of the most prized in fine dining today, selling for $15 to $25 per dressed bird in restaurant supply. Old American farms kept pigeons routinely until refrigerated meat shipping made the practice less necessary. The lofts disappeared, the skill disappeared, and modern fine dining restaurants today pay specialty importers premium prices for the same product their great-grandfathers raised in the backyard. This is the kind of opportunity the old farmers would have seen immediately. Most modern farmers walk past it without ever knowing it exists. Modern Americans only think about turkeys at Thanksgiving. The old farmers thought about them year-round. Heritage turkeys, the bronze and Narragansett and bourbon red and Royal Palm varieties were a staple of small family farms for 200 years. They produced eggs through spring and summer. They produced meat carcasses larger than any other bird on the property. They foraged across pastures and woodlots, gleaning grasshoppers, beetles, and grain that would otherwise have been wasted. A heritage turkey breeding flock could produce 30 to 60 birds per year for a small operation. At current prices for heritage breeds, those birds sell direct to consumer at $8 to $12 per pound, with whole dressed birds reaching $80 to $200 each. The modern industrial turkey, the broad-breasted white, has lost the ability to breed naturally and cannot live more than a year or two. The heritage turkeys our grandparents kept can breed naturally, live for 5 to 7 years, and produce some of the best-tasting meat in the entire poultry world. The market knows the difference. The farmers who got in early get the customers. Quail are the animal that modernized homesteading rediscovered, but the tradition goes back centuries on small family farms. A flock of 50 quail fits in the corner of a garage. The hens reach laying age at 6 to 8 weeks. They produce 280 to 300 eggs per year on tiny amounts of feed. The meat birds are processed at 8 weeks. The eggs sell at 60 cents to $1 each. The dressed carcasses sell at $4 to $7 each. The birds are silent enough that most regions allow them in residential zones where chickens are restricted. Old families kept quail in regions with hot summers, where European chickens struggled and Asian birds thrived. The tradition came to America with immigrants from Italy, Vietnam, China, and Eastern Europe, and most of the small American quail farms today still trace back to those families. In 2026, the quail egg market in America cannot keep up with demand. That gap was opened by the same industrial agriculture forces that ignored the bird in the first place. The opportunity is sitting there for the small farmers who recognize it. Most modern small farms have a tractor. The old small farms had a donkey, and not for sentiment. A working donkey costs almost nothing to feed. A single animal can pull a small plow, haul firewood, carry produce to market, and serve as a livestock guardian against coyotes and dogs. They live 30 to 40 years on minimal care. They are sure-footed on terrain that no tractor can manage. They do not need fuel. They do not break down in ways that require a mechanic. On the small farms of the last century, especially in hilly or mountainous regions, the working donkey was the engine of the entire operation. Loads of hay went up steep slopes that no machinery could climb. Trail rides, pack work, and hauling were all done by donkeys long after most farms had switched to tractors elsewhere. And here is what almost nobody knows. A guardian donkey, simply by living with a flock of sheep or goats, eliminates almost all coyote losses. The donkey will attack any predator that approaches the herd, and predators that have been kicked or stomped by a donkey do not come back. The savings in livestock losses on a small farm with predator pressure can pay for the donkey many times over in the first year alone. This is the one I told you about. Number 14, the single most important income source on most small family farms before World War II, and the one almost no modern small farmer pays attention to anymore. It was not just keeping a pig, it was keeping a brood sow, a breeding female, with her litters. A single good sow produces 8 to 12 piglets per litter, and she farrows twice a year. That is 16 to 24 piglets annually from one animal. The piglets sold at weaning, around 8 weeks of age, brought in real cash with almost no additional infrastructure. Some kept piglets through to finishing weight for higher returns. Some sold them as feeder pigs to neighbors who would finish them out. Either way, the sow herself was the asset, and her litters were the dividend. This is what old farmers called the mortgage lifter. The single sow, well-fed, well-bred, well-managed, could literally pay off a mortgage in 3 or 4 years just from her offspring. Families counted their wealth partly in how many breeding sows they had on the property. 2 sows meant a comfortable household. 4 meant a successful farm. 8 meant you were considered a real producer. Modern small farmers buy weaner pigs from someone else. They feed them out for 6 months. They sell or process them. They start over. They have given up the entire reproductive engine of the operation, which is exactly the part that used to generate the wealth. In 2026, the price for breeding stock heritage pigs has gone the opposite direction. A registered Tamworth, Berkshire, or large black sow with proven genetics sells for $800 to $2,000. Her piglets, if they are properly bred and registered, sell at weaning for $200 to $400 each. One sow producing 16 piglets per year at $300 each is $4,800 of gross revenue from a single animal. And that is before you count the meat from the cull pigs, the breeding services, or the sale of bred females to other operations. The brood sow was the engine. Modern small farms have walked away from her almost entirely, which is why the few who still keep her are the ones quietly clearing real money. The math is exactly the same as it was in 1925. The supply is just much smaller. Beyond honeybees, old farms kept other insects working for them too. Mason bees, leafcutter bees, and bumblebee colonies were tolerated and, in some cases, actively encouraged because the orchard and garden produced better when these pollinators were around in numbers. A small mason bee house, a block of wood with paper tubes inserted into drilled holes, attracts solitary native bees that pollinate fruit trees 4 times more efficiently than honeybees do per individual. The house costs almost nothing to build. The bees do not sting. They do not require management. They appear, they pollinate, they reproduce, and they leave their offspring in the tubes for the next season. Modern orchardists are rediscovering this. The fruit set on apple, pear, and cherry trees with active mason bee populations is dramatically higher than orchards that rely on honeybees alone. Old farmers did not have the science to explain it, but they knew it worked. They kept mason bee houses on the south wall of every fruit tree planting. The math has not changed. Most small family farms with a milk cow ended up with a calf each year, since the cow had to calve to keep producing milk. What old farmers did with that calf was the difference between profit and waste. They fed it out, slowly, on grass and hay through the summer, on the farm's surplus crops through the winter, and they processed it or sold it as a finished animal at 18 to 24 months. The result was a 600 to 800 pound carcass of grass-finished beef that fed the family or generated direct-to-consumer revenue at premium prices. This is the model that modern grass-fed beef operations are largely just rediscovering. Slow growth on pasture, finished without grain, processed and sold direct. It is exactly what every small dairy farm in America was doing in 1920, except the modern version has a website and the old version had a hand-painted sign at the end of the lane. People will tell you a farm dog is sentimental. The old farmers would have disagreed. A working dog was a labor-saving device, a security system, a pest control program, and a livestock manager, all in one animal. A border collie or kelpie could move a flock of 50 sheep that would have taken 3 people on foot. A Great Pyrenees or Anatolian shepherd could keep coyotes, stray dogs, and even bears away from the chickens and goats. A terrier kept rats out of the feed shed and the granary, where rodent losses on a small farm could easily run into the thousands of dollars per year of stored grain. Old farmers did not buy dogs. They bred their own from working stock, kept the best, sold the rest. A well-trained working dog could sell for the equivalent of several months' wages even in the 1920s. The dog earned its keep many times over, and the surplus puppies were a parallel income stream for the farms that produced the best lines. This one almost no modern American small farmer considers, but it was once a routine part of New England, Appalachian and Pacific Northwest small farms, the trout pond. A small spring-fed pond, half an acre or less, properly set up with cold water flow and oxygenation, could produce 200 to 500 pounds of trout per year for the family table and surplus for sale. Brook trout, brown trout, and rainbow trout grew well in the conditions most family farms could provide. And the meat was some of the most prized produce coming off the farm. Modern aquaculture has industrialized this, but the small-scale version is still entirely doable on the right property. A spring-fed pond, simple infrastructure, and a small annual stocking can produce enough fish to feed a family year-round and sell the surplus to neighbors and restaurants who cannot find freshwater trout anywhere else. The old farms in the right regions did this routinely. This is the one I told you about. The animal my grandmother kept on her property until the day she passed. Not a dairy goat, not a meat goat, a working goat. A small herd of 3 or 4 crossbred does that did one specific job almost no modern farmer remembers them for. They cleared brush. My grandmother had a piece of land that was constantly threatening to grow back into the forest if it was left alone. Blackberry canes, multiflora rose, saplings of pincherry, sassafras, and elm. The kind of vegetation that would take over an unmaintained field within 5 years and turn it into impenetrable scrub within 10. 3 goats on that land kept it open. They worked through brush that no machine could touch. They ate the woody stems, the thorny canes, the young saplings, and the persistent invasive species. They cleared land slowly, deliberately, and at no cost. They did the work that would have required a brush hog, a chainsaw, a herbicide sprayer, and several days of dangerous labor every year. And they did it for free, while producing milk, meat, and offspring on top. There is now a name for this in modern small farming. It is called targeted grazing or rented goat herds. Companies in California and Colorado charge $700 to $1,500 per acre to bring in goats and clear vegetation that no other method can handle as effectively or as cheaply. The practice is exploding because there is so much overgrown brush in fire-prone regions, and because the labor for traditional clearing has become so expensive. My grandmother kept goats for free clearing on her own property. The modern version of her business model is now charging premium prices for the same service. Most small farmers in fire-prone regions or with overgrown back acreage have not figured out yet that this is possibly the highest paid use of their land that exists, and the animal that does it is one of the cheapest livestock on this entire list. Try it next spring. 3 goats. 1 section of brush you've been losing the battle on. Watch what happens. The result will not surprise the old farmers. It will probably surprise you. This is the one nobody wants to hear, and it is the one that matters most. Old family farms did not just keep animals. They kept systems. The chickens cleaned up after the pigs and ate the parasites the pigs left behind. The pigs cleaned up after the cows and ate the windfall apples from the orchard. The sheep grazed pastures that were too short for cattle. The geese cleaned the pond, and the goats cleaned the brush at the wood's edge. The bees pollinated the orchard. The dogs guarded the flocks. The donkey hauled the loads. Every animal had a job, and the jobs interlocked into a system that produced more food and more income than any single animal ever could have on its own. Modern small farms specialize. The chicken farm raises only chickens. The goat farm raises only goats. And every farm fights the inputs and outputs of its single animal alone. The old farmers refused to play that game. They built ecosystems on small acreage, and the ecosystems quietly produced more value than any specialized operation could have managed. This is the deeper pro tip behind every animal we have talked about today. The animals were not the secret. The combination was the secret. The way each one fed into the next, used the same land in different ways, ate what the others left behind, and turned a small piece of ground into a working farm that fed a family for generations. We have forgotten how to think this way. The land has not. 20 animals. Each one quietly paid bills for someone, somewhere, in the not-so-distant past. Most of them are still right there for the taking, and the people raising them today are filling gaps in a market that the modern food system pretends does not exist. Hit the like button if any of this hit home. It helps these kinds of videos reach more people who might still be standing on the wrong side of this decision, and subscribe and stay close, because the next video is one you will not want to miss. Stay with us.